It always amazes me how a video, once released, takes on a life of its own, sparking conversations and reactions we could never fully predict. I have noticed that by carefully studying the comments left at specific moments, one can almost feel the emotional pulse of the audience as they watch. It's like a hidden layer of the story, revealed not just by the visuals, but by the viewers themselves. Today, I want to share a story that triggered quite a response, judging by the comments I've seen. It involves a palm tree farm in Indonesia, and an event so shocking it reverberated through the entire community. It was July 21st, 2016, near Palangkaraya. The morning began with the stillness that follows a night of heavy rain, the air thick with humidity. Reggie Peters, a 32-year-old farm advisor from Britain, was out checking the water systems, something he did regularly. He was known as a quiet, diligent man, always jotting down observations in his notebook. He'd been in Indonesia for 4 months, fascinated by the local wildlife, always pausing to observe even the snakes and lizards that others would shoo away. On that day, Reggie headed out to inspect the water ditches, critical for preventing floods during the approaching rainy season. He carried his notebook, measuring tape, and phone. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, saw him near a muddy ditch, kneeling and writing. They joked about the large snakes rumoured to inhabit the water channels, but Reggie just laughed, saying he'd love to see one up close. They later recalled that he seemed utterly unconcerned by their warnings, dismissing them as mere folklore. The palm farm was vast, stretching for miles, with rows of trees divided by narrow water channels. The ground was soft and muddy, and the air hummed with dragonflies and mosquitoes. The only sounds were distant chainsaws and the croaking of frogs. Reticulated pythons, some of the largest snakes in the world, lived in this area. They could grow over 20 feet long and weigh more than 200 pounds, lying in wait near the water for prey. While attacks on humans were rare, the snakes had been moving closer to inhabited areas as their natural habitats were destroyed. Locals knew to be cautious, some even carrying knives for protection. By late afternoon, Reggie hadn't returned. Amir grew worried and went to look for him. The farm was eerily silent, save for the insects. Then Amir saw it. One of Reggie's boots stuck in the mud near a water channel. A few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's midsection was grotesquely swollen, as if it had consumed a very large animal. Amir froze, then began shouting for Luffy and the other workers. Soon, 5 men stood there, watching as the snake slowly moved toward the bushes. The swollen part of its body dragged heavily, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and poles, cautiously poking at the snake from a distance. The python hissed loudly, opening its mouth to reveal its curved teeth, coiling up in defense. It was massive, around 15 feet long. None of the workers dared to approach. The farm supervisor arrived and called the local police. As they waited, the men continued to watch the snake. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something inside was moving. I've seen firsthand what snakes can do, the fear they can instill. I remember one case, reading the reports late at night, where workers found a python with a strange bulge. It was too big to be any normal animal. They killed the snake, and when they cut it open, they found a man named Reggie inside, covered in slime. Now I've come across another story, one that chills me even more because of its sheer randomness, its brutal unfairness. It was March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park, India. Two travellers were sleeping in a tent, unaware that a snake had quietly slithered inside. One of them, a young woman named Clare Johnson, would never wake up. Clare was 26 and from Melbourne, Australia. She'd quit her graphic design job to travel Asia for a year, a dream she'd been saving for nearly 2 years to fulfill. Her friends knew her as adventurous but careful. She researched her destinations, carried medical supplies, and kept a detailed blog for her family. Ranthambore was a place she'd always wanted to visit, a place where she hoped to photograph wild tigers. She'd even seen one, a female near a waterhole, on a safari tour that very day. She was staying at a basic eco-camp outside the park, sharing a tent with Lara, a German student she'd met on the train. The tents were simple, raised on wooden platforms with zippers. Claire was meticulous about keeping their tent organised, shaking out her shoes and making the entrance was always zipped tight. That evening, because it was cool, she'd zipped the tent completely closed, leaving only a small opening for air. The camp was next to dry grassland, thorny acacia trees, and tall grass. At night, insects buzzed and peacocks called in the distance. The ground was hard dirt, covered with leaves and rocks. It was the perfect environment for reptiles that hunted during the cool hours before sunrise. Spectacled cobras are common in Rajasthan, recognizable by the circular pattern on their hoods. They usually avoid people, but sometimes, in the early morning, they venture into human areas for mice or warmth. These cobras can grow up to 6 feet long and have a potent venom that affects the nervous system, strong enough to kill a person within hours without treatment. Tour guides always warn campers to check their bedding, because snakes sometimes crawl inside unnoticed. Sometime after 4 a.m., Lara woke to a soft rustling near the bottom of the tent. Half asleep, she grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam revealed a spectacled cobra, coiled just inches from Claire's sleeping bag, its head raised slightly. Before Lara could react, Claire moved in her sleep and stretched out her leg. Her bare ankle brushed against the snake's body. The cobra bit her twice, quickly sinking its fangs into the soft skin above her heel. I find myself thinking often about how easily a moment of carelessness can turn into tragedy, especially when humans venture into wild spaces. There was a woman named Lara, for example, who was backpacking in Australia. She learned this lesson in the most terrible way imaginable. Later that day, Lara's parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy. They asked for her body to be cremated following the local customs. The camp management decided not to close down their business, but they hired a local snake expert who started giving weekly talks to new guests. These talks taught people how to check their tents properly and where to keep lights on at night to avoid problems with snakes. Lara eventually went back to Germany, but she later wrote a detailed story about what happened on a travel website. Her story warned other backpackers to always check their tents, bedding and shoes when staying in areas where snakes might be present. This post was shared quietly for years as a serious reminder to travelers who thought sleeping close to nature was romantic without understanding the real dangers. This incident shows how important it is for travelers to take safety precautions seriously when staying in wilderness areas. Even experienced and careful travelers like Clare can face unexpected dangers when wild animals and humans share the same spaces. The tragedy serves as a reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. It was September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge Cruz was 42 years old and had worked in this lime orchard his whole life. He got up before sunrise every day to check the water systems, cut tree branches, and teach his oldest son how to tell if the fruit was healthy or sick. People in the village knew Jorge as someone they could count on. He was the type of person who would fix broken carts for his neighbors and lend them tools without expecting anything back. Jorge had a habit from when he was a child. He liked to work without shoes. He said this helped him feel the ground better and move faster when he had to climb the lower tree branches. The afternoon was very hot and the air felt heavy. The sun beat down on the leaves so hard that nothing seemed to move. This orchard had belonged to the same family for many years. On this particular day, the normal work routine would be interrupted by something that changed everything in just one moment. Jorge was working with two neighbors, Raul and Mateo. They were picking limes on the far side of the grove, where workers had made a pile of cut tree branches after cleaning the area recently. The three men were making jokes about how hot it was as they moved between the low tree branches, putting bunches of limes into bags. Jorge was wearing his wide hat pushed back on his head and an old faded shirt. He reached for a low branch and shifted his weight to pull the fruit closer to him. The ground in the orchard was hard dirt covered with cut leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches provided cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. There was a patch of wild plants that marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops made long shadows that moved across the ground. It was very quiet, so small sounds like fruit falling to the ground or clothes rubbing against tree bark were easy to hear. The men were focused on their work and conversation, not paying attention to potential dangers around them. A type of poisonous snake called the tersopilo, Brops asper, locally known as the naka, lives in Central America. These snakes are thick-bodied and usually grow to be 3 to 5 ft long. They have very dangerous poison that destroys skin and muscle, causes severe bleeding in the area where they bite, and can affect blood clotting and blood press throughout the body. These snakes blend in perfectly with fallen leaves and often stay completely still until someone steps close to them. When they bite someone, it usually causes extreme pain and the area swells up very quickly. That morning, neighbors had been talking about seeing more snakes since the recent rains. Jorge's wife had told him to wear boots while cleaning brush and debris. The pile of cut branches where they were working was a temporary heap of trimmings, exactly the kind of place where snakes like to hide. Raul later said he had warned Jorge to be careful, but Jorge waved off their concerns and said he would work quickly. When Jorge shifted his position, the snake attack happened instantly. The snake burst out from the leaves and bit the skin just above his ankle. Raúl and Mateo heard Jorge make a short, sharp cry of pain and saw him pull his foot back while grabbing at the wound. Before the other men could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood spotted the dirt where his foot had been. The pain hit Jorge immediately and was very severe. He bent over double and dropped the fruit he was holding. Within just a few minutes, his lower leg began to swell and the skin started to look bruised and discolored. He began throwing up and sweating heavily, and his face became very pale. Raúl quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they kept Jorge's leg still by making a splint from a broom handle. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, then pushed the cart toward the dirt road that led back to the village. The trip to the clinic was bumpy and slow. Dust covered Jorge's damp skin, and he became confused, speaking in broken words and going in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse looked at his swollen leg and noticed that his pulse was weak and his blood pressure was low. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but no antivenom. The special medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff used their radio to call the regional health center asking for help, but the nearest supply of antivenom and a properly equipped ambulance was hours away. Jorge's condition got worse. He became more and more disoriented, and his breathing became shallow. The medical staff could not help him get better. By evening, Jorge had died at the clinic, despite their efforts to stop the bleeding and help him breathe. Raúl said they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick PL. I've seen what snakes can do. I've read the reports, pored over the accounts, and even then, they still shock me. There was Jorge, for instance. He was bitten while harvesting limes. His flip phone and work notebook were found, stained, and returned to his family. In the weeks that followed, a traveling veterinarian came to the village. He brought a small supply of antivenom and taught basic training to local people so they could respond to emergencies. He showed them how to make splints from available materials, how to apply press bandages, and explained when and when not to use tourniquets. The villagers cleaned up and clearly marked the brush pile area, putting up a simple pole marker where Jorge had been bitten. His wife began wearing his wide-brimmed hat during harvest times, a visible reminder of his absence. The lime trees continued to produce fruit, and from that time forward, each harvest season began with a brief, serious reminder to all workers about being careful and staying safe. Then there's the story of Mina Belagan. It was May the 2nd, 2018, and the air over the Cross River felt heavy and still. Mina was 19 years old and had just returned from university a week earlier. She spent most of her afternoons at the river. People knew Mina for her lively personality. She often brought her cousins to swim with her, even though the older people in the village warned them that snakes were more active during the dry season. Mina didn't think their warnings were important. She believed that nothing dangerous ever happened in the shallow water. On this day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her for a swim. They left their sandals and shirts on the rocks before walking into the cool water. Mina had plans to go back to school soon. She talked about wanting to start a small community project when she returned, something that would teach younger children how to swim safely. She had always thought of the river as a place full of life, not danger. Because Mina felt so comfortable in the water, her cousins trusted her and followed her without worry. The afternoon was the kind where every sound seemed to carry far. The river's surface looked calm and reflected the cloudless sky, but local people often said the water was never truly quiet. Something was always moving underneath. The part of the river they chose was wide and shallow, with muddy banks that fishermen liked to use. The air was humid, and dragonflies flew just above the water's surface. Even though it was a bright day, the thick plants on the other side of the river made long shadows over the deeper parts of the water. African rock pythons are the biggest snakes on the continent. They can grow to be more than 20 feet long. These snakes hunt by staying very still until an animal comes close. Then they bite with powerful jaws before wrapping their body around their prey to squeeze it until it stops breathing. While attacks on people are rare, these snakes are known to catch and eat goats, dogs, and even large animals like antelopes. During the dry season, they often hunt near water sources that are getting smaller because that's where animals come to drink. Earlier that week, an older fisherman had warned Mina's uncle that he had seen a very large python lying in the sun on a log nearby. Children had been told not to swim until the rains came and made the water levels higher. But Mina insisted that the shallow bend where they swam was safe. Mina had been in the water for almost an hour, playing and floating on her back, when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was just a tree branch caught in the current. But when it curved and moved silently across the water's surface, fear spread through the group of children. The shape moved forward quickly, showing the patterned body of an enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed. Its jaws locked onto Mina's side before its body wrapped around her. Her cousin screamed as the snake's coils got tighter, forcing the air out of her lungs. The water became violent and choppy as Mina fought against the snake, then went still as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children ran as fast as they could back to the village, screaming for help. It took several minutes for the men to grab their long knives and run to the river. By the time they got to the river bend, the snake was still moving around in the water, but had pulled Mina deeper under. The men went into the water and cut at the python over and over until it finally let her go. When they pulled her onto the muddy riverbank, she had clearly been underwater for several minutes. Her skin was cold and pale, and her lips were a deep blue color. The villagers tried pressing on her chest and blowing air into her mouth, while others stood back in shocked silence. When they pressed on her chest, water came out of her mouth and nose and mixed with the mud under her head. Someone recorded the desperate scene with a phone. The sound of shouting and rushing water mixed with the noise of long knives hitting the snake's body. Their efforts continued for several minutes, but there was no sign that she was breathing. Mina's body was placed on a mat near the water as the villagers gathered in silence. For weeks afterward, the river bend remained empty. Fishermen refused to throw their nets there, calling the area cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers, especially during times when wild animals were more likely to come near human areas, looking for water and food. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning, as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies from happening again. Then there was Sammy Price, in Sweetwater, Texas. It was June 10th, 2013, and the fairground was extremely hot under a clear sky. Heat rose off the tarps and metal bleachers, turning what should have been a routine demonstration into a day where small mistakes would have serious consequences. Samuel "Sammy" Price was 38 years old and had been a volunteer snake handler at the annual rattlesnake roundup since he was a child. He did repair work around town and showed up every year to handle snakes for visitors. People respected him because there's a particular kind of tragedy in seeing someone with years of experience fall victim to a moment's lapse. I've seen it in the archives, in yellowed news clippings and faded case studies. The expert undone not by ignorance, but by a confluence of fatigue, prez, and a sense of duty. It reminds me that even the most seasoned among us are vulnerable. Sammy, a man steady from years of handling snakes, knew the dangers well. He taught volunteers, favouring hands-on experience, believing it could reduce risk. Locals trusted him because he was careful, correcting errors gently. But this year, the festival was more crowded, the schedule tighter. He'd been moving between snake pits all morning, answering questions, enduring the sun. He skipped breakfast to keep things running smoothly, and he felt weary, attributing it to the heat. His colleagues urged him to rest, hydrate, but he kept working. When asked to do one more demonstration that afternoon, he agreed, feeling it was his responsibility. The roundup used shallow pits with temporary barriers, a raised platform for the announcer, and folding chairs for the audience. The air was thick with the smells of fried food, car exhaust, and dust. Shade cloths and water were nearby, but the layout was cramped. Volunteers stuck in the sun. Spectators crowded the fence, phones raised, recording every move. The design prioritized visibility, but it reduced space for handlers and limited opportunities for cooling down, for both people and animals. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, potent pit vipers typically 4 to 5 feet long, possess venom that causes tissue damage, bleeding, and can trigger shock if a large dose is delivered. Large adults can strike with surprising speed. A stressed snake might twist unpredictably, altering a handler's grip and exposing skin. Even skilled handlers can be bitten when a snake is already agitated, or when heat and repeated handling elevate its stress. Earlier that day, organizers had cautioned volunteers to rotate turns and limit heavy handling during the hottest hours. A minor incident that morning had prompted a formal reminder to take breaks and drink water. Medical personnel were on standby with IV fluids and anti-venom. Sammy heard the warnings, agreed with them, but the crowd and the hectic schedule drew him back. He took a heavy Western diamondback from a colleague, entered the pit, wearing a leather glove and carrying a snake hook. With a practiced motion, he lifted the snake. The crowd momentarily relaxed, calmed by Sammy's steady presence. Then the snake, stressed, shifted, and twisted sharply. It lunged, its fangs sinking into the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain seared through his arm. He signaled he was, but his face flushed and sweat beaded on his forehead. He continued talking to the crowd for several minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he requested a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, discoloration spreading down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling reached past his elbow toward his shoulder, the skin darkening with mottled bruising as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent when it was clear he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied Prez to slow the venom's spread, started IV fluids, and administered the first vials of anti-venom. His breathing became shallow, his skin cold and blotched with bruising. Despite rapid treatment, his blood pressure plummeted and his pulse faded. Witnesses later recounted the desperate attempts to keep him conscious, as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. In the aftermath, friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions. They invited regional medics to review emergency procedures and practice drills. A younger relative of Sammy's began helping at the pits, prioritizing breaks and hydration over putting on a show. The festival board documented the incident and created a checklist for demonstrations, including maximum handling time, required breaks, and a rapid evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. It makes you wonder about the lives of animals in captivity. I came across another case from March 15, 2016, in the rainforests of southeastern Cameroon. Deep within the jungle, near the Sangha River, a converted logging camp sat isolated on 50 acres of abandoned land. This property had once been a legitimate primate research station, with all the proper permits. But those days were long gone. Erica Winslow, a 52-year-old former wildlife photographer from America, had been operating the facility illegally for 3 years after her research permits expired. She refused to surrender Caesar, an 18-year-old western lowland gorilla weighing 375 pounds. Her demanding personality and entitled behavior had made her notorious among local officials and village chiefs. She constantly complained about wildlife inspections and refused to acknowledge that her research permits had expired. With no formal primate training, she relied entirely on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods she found online. Her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behavior as she attempted to discipline Caesar using intimidation tactics. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, throwing branches at visitors and damaging the reinforced walls of his enclosure. Local villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night, and Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for the past 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands entirely. Cameroon's Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays. I've seen the aftermath of these tragedies too many times in my career, the result of keeping powerful wild animals in private hands. I remember one case in particular that haunts me still. The details are graphic, but they underscore the immense responsibility that comes with caring for these creatures, a responsibility that is so often tragically shirked. Warning signs had been mounting for months. They always do. In this case, it was Caesar, a western lowland gorilla. Adult male gorillas possess the strength of 10 humans. Their hands can exert crushing force, and their canine teeth can tear through flesh and bone. Even when they appear peaceful, captive gorillas under stress can become unpredictable, especially when they perceive a threat. Caesar, you see, had been showing classic signs of psychological distress from improper captivity and inadequate social interaction. These creatures require specialized care that few private individuals can provide. On that evening, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar sat defiantly in the center of his enclos, ignoring her increasingly loud commands to enter his night quarters. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod fashioned from old logging equipment and unlocked the heavy gate to his small, reinforced pen. That decision would prove fatal. As she stepped inside, wielding the electrical device, Caesar's behavior shifted instantly. The 375-pound silverback charged across the enclos with terrifying speed. His body slammed into Erica's chest, launching her backward into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut deep into her back as Caesar's enormous hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely. Erica's screams echoed across the empty rainforest as the gorilla grabbed her right hand, still clutching the prod. His bite force crushed 3 fingers at the knuckles, severing them entirely. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body off the ground and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated as Caesar slammed her face first into the concrete floor. Her nose shattered on impact, creating a pool of blood beneath her head. The gorilla then grabbed her right leg and twisted, snapping her femur bone. The jagged fracture tore through muscle and skin. Caesar positioned himself over Erica's prone form and brought both fists down on her rib cage. 6 ribs cracked simultaneously, the broken bones puncturing both lungs. Her breathing became shallow as blood filled her chest cavity. For his final attack, Caesar grabbed Erica's head between his palms and squeezed. Her skull cracked, and brain matter leaked onto the concrete floor. Her body went limp. The silverback sat calmly beside the lifeless body for the next 4 hours, occasionally grooming blood from his hands. Local villagers discovered the scene the following morning. Cameroonian authorities launched an immediate investigation, and wildlife officials worked to relocate Caesar to the Lima Wildlife Centre. The incident sparked renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to both operators and local communities. Government agents seized all remaining animals from the property within days. Erica's family released a statement expressing their grief, while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. It was July 22nd, 2017, along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River, where towering pine trees cast long shadows across the rushing water. The remote wilderness area, known for its crystal-clear streams and abundant wildlife, had become the destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife Sarah and their 2 young children Emma and Jake to this secluded spot. What made this trip different was the modified dog crate in the back of their truck, containing their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer operating in the grey areas of wildlife law. The construction worker's overconfident personality had convinced him that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbours it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighbourhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclosure and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence, but bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate investigation. Mountain cougars are apex predators, perfectly designed for stealth hunting, with powerful hind legs capable of propelling their muscular bodies over 20 feet in a single bound. Adult males can weigh up to 140 pounds of pure muscle, equipped with razor-sharp retractable claws and canine teeth designed to deliver precise killing bites to the neck and spine. Unlike domestic cats, it's a mistake to believe that raising a wild animal in captivity somehow domesticates its nature. Even when raised by humans, cougars never lose their instincts. In fact, those instincts can become even more pronounced in unfamiliar settings, where their sense of territory is heightened. I remember reading about a man named Landon and his fatal misjudgment with a 3-year-old cougar named Scout. Landon released Scout from his transport crate, wanting to let him stretch and explore. He thought Scout's upbringing had somehow tamed the animal, that he could treat this predator like a house cat. As Landon's family set up their fishing gear, Scout emerged and immediately began surveying this new territory. His coat blended into the brush, his yellow eyes scanning every movement, every sound. When Landon walked toward the river to fill their water containers, Scout's predatory instincts kicked in. The cougar crouched behind a fallen log, muscles coiled. His tail twitched, the classic hunting signal. Then, in complete silence, he launched himself, covering 20 feet in a single leap. Scout struck Landon squarely in the back. His 4-inch claws sank into Landon's shoulders, designed to grip struggling prey. The cougar's jaws clamped onto the back of Landon's neck. His canine teeth, evolved for this very purpose, punctured the cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord instantly. The bite caused immediate paralysis. Landon couldn't move, his face submerged, and he drowned within 90 seconds. Scout maintained his grip, following millions of years of programming to when his prey was subdued. Then he dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush, caching his kill away from scavengers. Landon's wife, Sarah, grabbed their children and rushed them to the safety of their locked truck. They waited there for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers arrived. Authorities launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the cougar, and the incident reignited debates about exotic animal ownership. There was another case, this one on September 8, 2015, on a ranch in South Texas. The remote property, dotted with mesquite trees under a star-filled sky, was miles from any neighbours. Perfect isolation for Marcus Ellison's dangerous hobby. The 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician. She had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate, Luna, a jaguar. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna as a 6-month-old cub from a black market dealer. He had a thrill-seeking personality and a desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols, spending his earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown into a 180-pound predator, but Marcus believed their bond would protect him. Lisa had been pressuring him to surrender Luna to a sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. Luna had been refusing food for 4 days, marking her territory throughout the house, and obsessively pacing her enclosure. Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils were constantly dilated, indicating severe stress. Neighbours even reported hearing strange vocalizations at night. Jaguars are the 3rd largest big cats in the world, with the strongest bite force of any feline. They can crush turtle shells and caiman skulls. They are apex predators, killing with precise bites to the skull or spine. Even hand-raised jaguars retain their wild instincts and can become aggressive when stressed. Marcus made a fatal mistake when he entered Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her refusal to eat, he believed their bond would allow him to safely check on her. He unlocked the gate to her pen and stepped inside, carrying only a flashlight. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her eyes reflecting the beam as he approached. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand, Luna's predatory instincts took over. Her muscles propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. Her body slammed into Marcus's chest. I still remember the chilling details of what happened to Marcus. Luna, the jaguar, had struck with the force of a battering ram, sending him crashing onto the concrete floor. His flashlight skittered away into the darkness as she went for the kill. Her jaws locked around his throat with surgical precision, her canine teeth sinking deep. The jaguar's bite force, 1,500 pounds per square inch, crushed Marcus's windpipe instantly, cutting off his air supply. Her teeth simultaneously severed both carotid arteries, causing massive blood loss and a rapid drop in blood pressure. He lost consciousness within 30 seconds. Luna maintained her grip for 3 full minutes, her instinct ensuring her prey was completely subdued before feeding. Once satisfied, she released her hold and began to feed, starting with the soft tissue of his abdomen. Her powerful jaws crushed through ribs to reach the internal organs. Her razor-sharp teeth made quick work of muscle and bone as she consumed her kill. The following morning, Lisa discovered the scene. Luna sat calmly in the corner of her enclosure, methodically grooming blood from her paws and face. Marcus's partially consumed body lay in the center of the pen, a grim testament to the power of wild instincts. The incident sparked renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership in Texas. Marcus's family released a statement acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping wild predators as pets, urging others to learn from their tragic loss. Then there's the story of Brianna Ellis. It was June 14, 2018, in Homestead, Florida. Behind a modest rental house was an elaborate backyard pond system, 40 by 60 feet, artificially maintained, and home to one of nature's most dangerous predators. Brianna, a 26-year-old marine biology graduate student, was using the location for her thesis research on reptilian behavior patterns. She shared the property with her friends Kevin Torres, a 27-year-old photographer documenting her work, and Amanda Walsh, a 25-year-old social media influencer who had rented the house specifically for its unique backyard feature. 2 years earlier, Brianna had rescued Brutus, a 9-foot American alligator, from a failing roadside attraction that was being shut down. He'd been malnourished and living in deplorable conditions. Her academic knowledge of reptilian behavior convinced her that she could safely study Brutus while providing him proper care. Amanda's landlord was completely unaware that a 350-pound apex predator was living in his backyard pond. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive during feeding times, lunging at the pond's edge whenever anyone approached. Despite her friend's protests, Brianna continued hand-feeding the massive reptile, believing her scientific understanding gave her an advantage. Neighbors had been complaining about strange splashing sounds echoing through the night, and Brutus had been floating motionless for hours, displaying classic hunting behavior. American alligators are among the most efficient predators on Earth, perfectly evolved killing machines that have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 pounds, with jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of prise per square inch. Their bite force is strong enough to crush a bowling ball, and their signature death roll technique can dismember prey within seconds. These apex predators are ambush hunters by nature, capable of explosive bursts of speed. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the Florida sun began setting. She had dropped her pH testing equipment into the deeper section of the pond earlier that day, and the waterlogged instruments needed to be retrieved manually. Despite Kevin's suggestions to use a pool net, Brianna insisted on entering the water herself to recover the expensive scientific equipment. This decision proved catastrophic, as dusk represents the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, the water reaching her thighs, Brutus began his approach with the stealth that had made his species apex predators for millions of years. The 350-pound alligator moved through the water with incredible precision, his massive body creating no visible wake as he closed the distance. Brianna bent down to retrieve her submerged equipment, completely focused on the task, unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface, his eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline as he prepared for his explosive assault. The attack came with devastating force and lightning speed. Brutus launched himself upward and forward in one fluid motion, his massive jaws opening wide to reveal rows of conical teeth. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, and his jaw, press of nearly 3,000 pounds per square inch, crushed her femur bone instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll technique. The powerful alligator spun his body rapidly, using his muscular tail for propulsion, creating a whirlpool of churning water and blood. The rotational force generated by his 350-pound body tore Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood into the water, causing immediate shock. Before Brianna could escape, Brutus released the severed limb and attacked again with ruthless efficiency. His jaws clamped down on her torso, his teeth puncturing her rib cage. There are moments I find myself reflecting on the unpredictable power of the natural world, the tragic consequences when we underestimate it. I remember reading about a woman named Brianna who was dragged into a pond by an alligator named Brutus. The thrashing continued for nearly 2 minutes as Brutus performed his instinctive drowning technique. Her body went completely limp as her lungs filled. It's a stark reminder of the wildness that exists, even in our own backyards. The following day, Brutus had retreated to the deepest section of the pond with his kill. Local authorities launched a comprehensive investigations into the illegal possession of the dangerous reptile, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture and relocate Brutus. The incident prompted immediate changes to local ordinances regarding exotic animal ownership in residential areas. I recall reading about a similar tragedy, this one unfolding on October 3, 2016, in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. Picture a weathered log cabin, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, accessible only by a narrow dirt road. This isolated retreat was home to Shah Gallagher, a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator, a man whose career had ended in disgrace 3 years earlier. He'd retreated to this inherited family property after losing his rehabilitation license, a consequence of a previous bear incident that left him with a permanent limp. Sean shared his remote sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 lb. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death in the wild. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs had driven him to keep Kodiak, despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions and his deteriorating mental state from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food portions, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful predators, despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies. Adult males can reach speeds of 30 mph and possess the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their powerful jaws can exert over 800 lb of pres per square inch, easily capable of crushing human skulls, while their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal creatures, most active during twilight and nighttime hours, when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning, when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15x20 FT space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room, carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that made black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400 lb black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 FT and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his rib cage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 lb per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the pres, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later, when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. Local authorities launched an eye. I've always been drawn to stories where the lines between predator and companion blur, often with tragic consequences. There was the case of Kodiak, the black bear illegally kept as a pet, and the frantic efforts to relocate him to a sanctuary. But the story that haunts me most is that of Michael Torres. It was March 22nd, 2015, near Houston, Texas. The air was thick with that early spring humidity, the kind that makes sounds carry in strange ways. Behind a chain-link fence, a Bengal tiger paced restlessly. Michael was a 41-year-old mechanic, a loner who preferred the company of engines and animals. He started with snakes and iguanas, then a serval, and finally Raja, a 6-year-old Bengal tiger. He kept Raja in a reinforced enclosure, and neighbours would sometimes see him walking the tiger on a chain, talking to it like a friend. He believed Raja recognised his scent and would never hurt him. He told a friend it was all about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. That afternoon was overcast and sticky, the enclosure smelling of straw and damp soil. A friend, Luis Alvarez, stopped by to borrow a wrench and watched as Michael carried tools toward the cage. Raja was pacing more than usual, his tail lashing. Construction noise from a nearby property seemed to agitate him. Michael believed the tiger would settle once he started cleaning. Bengal tigers are apex predators. Their bite can crush bone with over 1,000 pounds of pris. Even those raised from cubs retain their hunting instincts. Male tigers can weigh over 400 pounds and strike with enough force to shatter ribs. Their attacks rarely involve warning growls. Movement is often the trigger. Lewis stood about 20 yards away as Michael opened the inner gate to replace the straw. He'd left the outer gate partially open for convenience. Louise said Raja continued pacing, muscles tense. Michael glanced up, muttered something, and bent to lift a shovel. Luis later told investigators he saw the tiger freeze, ears flattened, body crouched low, tail twitching. Then Raja lunged. The impact was a hollow sound of metal and flesh. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him down. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl towards the gate. Raja followed, clamping its jaws around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclosure. Luis shouted and threw a wrench, which clattered uselessly off the fence. Michael swung the shovel handle, striking Raja's snout, but the tiger's jaws tightened. Luis threw gravel, screaming for the tiger to stop. Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. Deputies arrived 10 minutes later and waited for animal control with tranquilizer rifles. But when Raja charged the fencing, an officer fired his service rifle, striking the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter, exhaling once before going still. Michael's body showed extensive trauma, massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm was partially severed, and his face was unrecognizable. Investigators noted the lack of a secondary containment system or safety barrier. The open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's sister handled arrangements quietly, declining interviews. Fewer than 20 people attended his funeral. Neighbours left flowers at the fence, the straw inside still stained dark where the attack happened. Another story, equally unsettling, unfolded on January 14, 2016, in Surabaya, Indonesia. The air was heavy with humidity, the sounds of the city distant. Behind a row of warehouses, a private experiment in control was nearing its breaking point. I have always found the stories of Komodo dragons unsettling, perhaps because they seem like living dinosaurs, creatures from a vanished age. There's a chilling account I came across recently of a man named Ahmad in Indonesia, who kept one of these dragons at his warehouse. He truly believed he understood the animal. He was tragically mistaken. Ahmad had raised the Komodo dragon since it was small, feeding it by hand. He was proud that it seemed to trust him. But one Thursday morning, after skipping a feeding, he entered the enclosure to clean its water basin. The dragon was in the corner, motionless. Komodo dragons, I've learned, can grow to an astonishing 10 feet long, with a bite strong enough to crush bone. Their venom contains toxins that cause rapid blood loss. Yudi, a worker at the warehouse, heard a clang of metal and a cry. He ran to the back and saw Ahmad fall. The dragon latched onto his leg. Ahmad yelled for help as the dragon released only to lunge again, this time clamping down on his forearm. Yudi grabbed a metal pole and struck the dragon, which turned, mouth gaping. Ahmad tried to crawl backward, leaving a trail of blood. The dragon attacked once more, sinking its teeth into his side. Yudi continued to strike the dragon until it finally backed away. Ahmad slumped to the ground, the concrete beneath him dark red. Yudi managed to lock the dragon in its enclosure, but it was too late. By the time emergency responders arrived, Ahmad was gone. The veterinarians who examined the animal said it had shown signs of food aggression. The Komodo dragon was sedated and taken to a wildlife rehabilitation center. The story, sadly, was quickly forgotten by most, buried in the local news. But within the warehouse community, it served as a quiet warning. Ahmad had treated the dragon like a companion, never realizing that to it, he was always prey. I've always been haunted by the idea of a sudden, brutal end. An end that comes not from malice, but from a misread signal, a forgotten latch, a moment of inattention. The story of Bruno the bear is one that sticks with me. It reminds us how thin the line can be between sanctuary and tragedy. The sanctuary, a place meant for safety, was situated on rolling pasture, the border marked by tall pines. It was early summer, and the air was thick with the smells of hay and meat. That morning, though, an unsettling quiet hung over the enclosure, broken only by the restless pacing of claws and the creak of metal gates. Aaron arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal. 15 pounds of meat, carefully mixed with supplements. Mark, her colleague, had left the previous evening to visit his sister. He reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, around 10 broke, he texted Aaron but received no reply. Assuming she was busy, he began his drive back. He pulled into the gravel lot just after noon and immediately noticed the outer gate to Bruno's enclosure was half open. Beside it, the feeding pail lay overturned. Then he heard screaming. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, each swipe accompanied by a deep huffing sound. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake, leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, claws sinking deep. Aaron saw Mark try to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently, before adjusting his grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and the evidence within the enclosure. The entire attack lasted less than 30 seconds. Aaron dragged herself backward, leaving red streaks along the concrete, reaching the open gate, and collapsing near the outer fence. She could hear Mark shouting, "Stop!" abruptly, replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call from a neighbour. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered and exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal, was cited as the cause. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew entirely from animal work. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. It was August 19th, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp, the acacia trees still dripping. At Johan Boa's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive, and Johan decided to tend to the animal himself. It was a routine he had performed hundreds of times before, one that would end differently this time. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had transformed his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclosure for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation mixed with business. To staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when senses shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone, Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behaviour early and told Johann that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johann brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johann took a broom and bucket toward the enclos, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. There are moments I can't shake from my mind, images that return in the dead of night. The details from the lion attack at that lodge. They stay with me. The worker, recording casually as Jan approached the gate. Simba, the lion, ears shifting forward, body low to the ground. Then the sudden, brutal lunge. Jan entered through the inner gate, closing it behind him, but leaving the outer one slightly ajar. He began sweeping near the feeding platform, speaking softly as he worked, and the other worker continued filming, fascinated by Jan's calmness. A few moments passed without issue, but then Simba began circling, his tail flicking sharply. From the video, and from witnesses interviewed later, Simba's behavior changed fast. He lowered his head, crouching, and then he lunged. The impact knocked Jan forward onto the dirt, the broom clattering away. Simba's jaws clamped around his shoulder, driving him down. Jan yelled and pushed against the lion's muzzle with his free arm, but Simba shifted his grip, teeth sinking into the back of his neck. The sound of deep growling overpowered Jan's cries. Simba dragged Jan several feet toward the shade structure, his claws tearing through the man's shirt and skin. Jan tried rolling onto his back, kicking at the animal's chest, but the lion's weight crushed his ribs. The broom handle snapped as he tried to wedge it between them. Another employee ran toward the gate with a bucket, throwing water over the fence, but it only startled Simba for a second. Jan's voice faltered into short, gurgled gasps. Simba then lunged again, biting into his throat. The motion was efficient and final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Jan's body went limp. The growls faded into rhythmic breathing. One worker ran to the control hut, slamming the gate alarm that signaled an animal emergency. The other, still holding the camera, didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Rangers from a nearby property arrived within minutes, tranquilizer rifles ready. They found Simba standing over Jan's body. When the lion turned toward them, shoulders low and tail flicking, they fired 2 darts into his flank. Simba flinched, growled, and backed several steps before collapsing beside Jan. Once Simba was confirmed sedated, the team pulled Jan's body free, using a canvas stretcher, his clothing torn and soaked through with blood. Autopsy revealed crushing trauma to the neck and severe blood loss. Bite movements and tissue analysis confirmed a single sustained attack, consistent with defensive predation rather than aggression. The lodge was closed the same week. Simba was euthanized humanely after sedation, and his remains were sent to a veterinary pathology lab in Pretoria for examination. Officials classified the incident as preventable, citing complacency and poor safety protocol. His wife sold the property soon after, and the lion enclose were sealed for good. Then there's the incident that occurred on October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. Birds moved between the trees along the edge of the Reeves property. Behind the modest brick house, two large cages stood under a tin awning, built strong but weathered, their bars streaked with rust. Inside were two chimpanzees, making sharp and uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn into something violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves was 58, a retired lab technician who had worked most of her life at a local medical research facility. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined and precise, with a fascination for animals that bordered on obsession. After retiring early, she poured her savings into building an enclosure for two young chimpanzees she had adopted from a private exotic pet dealer. She named them Buddy and Rosie, a male and female she'd raised since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom Reeves, visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps, once under 70 pounds, had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are strong beyond proportion, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 pounds, their jaws capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 1 to 200 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression when agitated or competing for dominance, targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their opponents. Captivity often amplifies these instincts, especially when confinement or frustration builds. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset, and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now. Feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. That Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. On that day, Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclosure. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles, while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty panhoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. I still remember the silence that fell over the animal park that day, broken only by the soft panting of the chimps. A silence that followed a boy's fall into their enclosure. Before that, there were only the sounds of children laughing, teachers instructing, and the distant calls of animals. Then a gasp, a scream, and the thud of a body hitting the ground. It all changed so quickly. It was April 17th, 2015, a bright, warm afternoon just outside Chicago. Yellow school buses were pulling into the parking lot of a small, private animal park. The kind of roadside zoo where the paint is fading and rust eats at the fences. Families and school groups mingled, the teachers trying to wrangle their students as they pointed at the parrots, goats, and monkeys in their cramped pens. Near the middle of the park was the chimpanzee exhibit, marked by a low chain-link railing and a shallow, algae-filled moat. A hand-painted sign warned visitors against climbing or leaning on the fence. Inside, 2 adult males and a younger female lived amongst wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The enclos, with its streaked walls, looked rather outdated. Matthew Collins, a 12-year-old 6th grader, was there on a field trip. His mother worked nights as a nurse, and his father was a forklift operator. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals. He carried a second-hand digital camera, saved for by mowing lawns, determined to get the best photos of the chimps. The group gathered near the enclos, the air thick with the smell of hay, damp earth, and old feed. Matthew, unable to get a clear shot, stepped onto the lower rail for balance, ignoring his classmates' warnings. The railing was slick, and his foot slipped. He dropped into the pit. Teachers screamed. Some children cried. The chimps were silent for a moment. Then one of the males, Bo, bristled with tension. He hooted sharply, slapped the dirt, and moved toward the boy. The younger male followed. Visitors later described the sounds as chilling. Deep hoots rising in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The chimps stopped just feet away, heads tilted, their eyes fixed on the unexpected figure in their space. Bo grabbed Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed, trying to crawl backward, but Bo's grip was too strong. The first strike wasn't a bite, but a dominance blow, a hard smack to the head. Then came the bite. A zookeeper, hearing the commotion, ran toward the enclos with a hose, spraying water into the pit. The high-press stream broke the chimp's focus for a few seconds. Bo released Matthew, slapped the ground, and charged again, stopping just short of the water. The younger male paced, pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier. Eventually, Bo released Matthew's shirt. I remember reading the details in the report later. The other incident, the one that occurred a few years before. The parallels were haunting. In that earlier case, it was Linda, a caretaker. She tried to crawl toward the gate, a pool of blood forming beneath her. Buddy, one of the chimps, grabbed her by the hair, dragging her back. He bit her neck again and again, each time slower, deliberate. Her body stiffened, then went limp. The attack lasted less than a minute, but it must have felt like an eternity. By the time deputies arrived 10 minutes later, the yard was silent. The chimps stood near the body, panting. Buddy had blood on his hands and chest. Rosie, the other chimp, sat by the gate, rocking slightly. Officers tried to use tranquilizers, but Buddy charged the fence. A deputy fired 2 rifle rounds, hitting him in the chest and neck. Both animals fell inside the enclos, twitching as Tom, Linda's husband, was led away. Linda was found near the center of the cage, She had suffered massive trauma: scalp avulsion, facial disfigurement, multiple fractures. Her pulse was gone before help arrived. Investigators noted that the outer gate hadn't been locked, a lapse in Linda's routine. Tom refused interviews. He moved away within months, leaving the house empty and the enclos to rust. At the quiet funeral, former co-workers remembered Linda as gentle and curious. But behind the condolences, there was disbelief that a bond built over years could turn fatal in seconds. The enclos was later dismantled, leaving only a bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark, where the hose couldn't wash everything away. There's a chilling story I keep returning to, about the day a chimpanzee's aggression surfaced with a violence that familiarity couldn't prevent. It happened on a seemingly ordinary afternoon, June 11th, 2014, in Stamford, Connecticut. The houses on Rockledge Drive stood in neat rows, but inside one of them, a woman was about to face an attack that would shock the entire community. Her name was Belinda Holmes, 57 years old, known for keeping an unusual companion, a male chimpanzee named Charlie. She'd gotten him as an infant, years earlier, ignoring the state laws that forbade owning such animals. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, driving him around in her car. Friends said she was devoted to him. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle. Children stared as he looked out the windows. Neighbors watched Belinda walk him on a leash. She treated him like family, defending him whenever anyone expressed concern. But there were warning signs. Charlie had grown much larger over the years. By age 12, he weighed over 120 pounds. Belinda struggled to hold him back when he became upset, but she insisted he was gentle. The house itself showed years of living with the animal. Furniture was scratched and damaged. The air often smelled of animal musk. Charlie moved freely through the rooms. On that warm June day, with the windows open, Charlie grew restless, pacing and making noise, as Belinda tried to calm him with fruit and snacks. Years of living in a human household hadn't removed Charlie's natural instincts. Months earlier, a neighbor had called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard, chasing cars and pounding on a vehicle before Belinda brought him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed that Charlie became irritable around strangers, but Belinda continued to insist he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm. The attack started in seconds. Charlie lunged forward and slammed Belinda backward into the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrible force. Neighbors heard the noise through the open windows. Furniture crashed, and Belinda screamed. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to protect herself. Blood pooled quickly across the carpet as he continued the assault with relentless strength. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her with his fists, then bit into her forearm and broke the bone. Her screams brought neighbors running to the house. One man tried the door, but stopped when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda. his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbours backed away and called 911, their voices shaking as they described what was happening. Police arrived within minutes. Officers walking toward the front door heard the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers decided they had to act. Officers fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely awake, her face destroyed and her hands mangled. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was severe. She was airlifted to a trauma centre with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands, requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was flipped over, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbours gathered outside. The screams, they said, would stay with them forever. Those who witnessed the aftermath of the chimpanzee attack were shaken to their core. Belinda, though she survived, faced a life forever altered, marked by surgeries and the need for constant care. It sparked a national conversation, a reckoning with the inherent dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets. In Connecticut, stricter laws were enacted, banning private chimpanzee ownership outright. The house where it happened was eventually sold, the new owners forever aware of the tragedy woven into the property's history. I think of Daniel Ortiz, a high school track coach, on May 28, 2017. It was Memorial Day weekend, and families had gathered for a barbecue along a bend of the Colorado River just outside Austin, Texas. The scene was idyllic, a quiet patch of grass shaded by live oaks, the river shimmering in the afternoon heat. But one guest had brought an animal that belonged far away from such a gathering. Daniel was known for his steadiness, the kind of person who anticipated needs, bringing extra water and sunscreen. He'd finished a run and stopped by the barbecue after a friend's text. He was comfortable around animals. He volunteered at a local shelter, calming anxious dogs before adoption events. He kept his distance, respectful, observing from behind a trash can. The chimpanzee wore a harness, and the owner was handing out fruit, engaging with onlookers. Daniel, wanting to capture the scene for his students, moved a few feet forward, angling for a clear photo. But adult male chimpanzees aren't meant for public gatherings. Dominance, in their world, is enforced with sudden violence. Years of human handling can't erase those deep instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, the competition for food, these can trigger those instincts in an instant. The picnic site was just beyond the Austin city limits, outside municipal oversight, and the handler lacked the proper permits. A couple stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler with a red cup. The owner shortened the leash, but kept feeding it fruit. A runner passing by warned that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, waiting for the chimp to settle. The tension was palpable. Children were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry, grunting, its eyes fixed on moving hands and faces. The owner tugged at the leash, which had slackened. Daniel stepped closer, maybe 2 feet, to get a better shot. In a blur of dark arms and bared teeth, the chimp lunged. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. His phone skidded across the dirt. The first bite tore into his forearm, skin and muscle ripped apart. He stumbled backward, trying to pull free, but the chimp's grip wouldn't loosen. A second bite tore into his hand. Screams filled the air. The chimp dragged Daniel down, pinning him. He tried to roll to get to his feet, but the chimp climbed onto his torso, hammering his shoulder. The leash tangled around the owner's legs, causing him to fall, slackening the leash again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head, and bit into his cheek. Blood stained the grass, streaking the chimp's face. Intervention attempts failed. A kick to the hip, a shove with a folding chair. Nothing worked. The sounds were awful. Wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, shrieks from the animal, grunts from Daniel with each bite. A woman dragged 2 children away. The owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest, creating a brief barrier against a picnic table leg. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally weakening. Daniel's movement slowed. Another bite, this time breaking a bone in his wrist. Bystanders threw bottles, tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but it was no use. Emergency calls went out, but the rural location meant help was delayed. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight. Daniel lay motionless on the trampled grass. I've always been struck by how quickly things can change, how a seemingly normal situation can turn in an instant. I remember reading about a seemingly routine animal demonstration that went horribly wrong. It was September 14th, 2018, in Los Angeles, California. The sun was just rising over a small production studio, ready for what seemed like a simple shoot, a chimpanzee demonstration for a daytime talk show. But the press of the lights, the heat, and a crowd of strangers proved to be too much. Kevin Harris, a 41-year-old exotic animal trainer, had been working with animals for 2 decades. He'd built his career on patience, teaching wild animals to tolerate human environments. This particular job was just another paycheck, another chance to promote his business. The chimp, a 13-year-old male named Mike, had been with Kevin since he was a baby. At 125 pounds, Mike was strong, intelligent, but also, when stressed, unpredictable. The set was simple: a sofa, a coffee table, a painted backdrop under hot studio lights. Mike sat on a stool next to Kevin, wearing only a light collar and leash. He was restless, tugging at the strap, looking at the unfamiliar faces. Before they started filming, the animal safety consultant suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing signs of stress, pacing, baring his teeth, pulling sharply on the lead. But the director wanted to move forward. The schedule was tight, and the sunlight was already changing. Kevin re-asked everyone, giving Mike pieces of banana to calm him. For a moment, it seemed to work. The cameras started rolling. The host smiled and began reading her lines. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave, a trick they'd practiced many times. For a few seconds, Everything was fine. Then the boom microphone dipped, casting a shadow across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. A low pant hoot echoed through the room. Kevin turned, speaking softly, reaching out to calm him. That touch broke the fragile balance. The chimp lunged. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward, the stool clattering. Mike's hands came down, fists hammering Kevin's chest. Shouts, hoots, the crash of equipment filled the air. Someone yelled to cut the power. Kevin tried to protect his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm. The bite tore through muscle and tendons. Blood sprayed across the carpet as Kevin tried to free himself. The chimp released, then struck again, biting his shoulder, hitting him with his fists. The host ran. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. The impact cracked a camera. The chimp's shrieks grew louder, rhythmic, mechanical, each sound matching a strike or bite. Kevin's movements slowed. His left arm hung limp. Another crew member threw a fire extinguisher. The spray filled the air, coating the floor in white dust. Mike released Kevin for a moment, then turned toward the noise, baring teeth streaked with red. Security burst in, one man with another extinguisher, another with a baton. The first blast hit Mike in the chest. He reared back. The second spray pushed him away from Kevin, who lay motionless. Animal control arrived within minutes, summoned by the studio. They tranquilized Mike, the dart hitting his shoulder as he bared his teeth. He staggered, then collapsed beside the overturned couch, eyes fluttering. Kevin survived, but barely. Paramedics stabilized him and rushed him to a trauma center. Surgeons documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production was shut down. The footage was never aired. Investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. Then, almost a year and a month later, on October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fortal Highway in western Uganda, another tragedy was unfolding. The road, a lifeline between towns, had become a dangerous crossing for wildlife. Martin Blake, a 48-year-old wildlife photographer, was travelling alone. He'd spent 2 weeks documenting primates in East Africa and wanted one last series of images before flying home. He was known for pursuing difficult shots, often leaving marked trails to capture animals in unusual settings. That morning, he drove west out of Fortal and stopped where the highway cut through forest slopes. He had heard stories of chimpanzees there. I've read accounts of chimpanzee attacks, of course, but there was one I came across in my research that haunts me still. It's a stark reminder of how easily our assumptions about nature can turn deadly. A photographer, driven by the pursuit of a unique image, ventured too close, dismissed warnings, and ultimately paid the ultimate price. Martin, an experienced photographer, had his sights set on capturing chimpanzees against the backdrop of a mountain road. He'd photographed gorillas and monkeys before, but this time his ambition led him into danger. He parked near a bend in the road and started walking along the shoulder, camera in hand. A local motorbike rider shouted a warning, gesturing towards the trees, but Martin waved it off. He seemed more concerned about the speeding trucks than the animals themselves. The highway S through dense vegetation, creating a corridor of green. On one side, a steep dirt slope rose, draped with vines. On the other, trees leaned precariously over a drop into the undergrowth. These were the margins where chimpanzees sometimes appeared, navigating the edges of their shrinking habitat. Rangers often warned tourists to stay in their vehicles, and truck drivers had reported seeing chimps near the bends where fruit trees grew close to the road. Locals avoided walking there alone, especially in the mornings when the animals were most active. Martin had heard these warnings at his lodge, but he dismissed them, confident in his experience working around gorillas. Just a few minutes into his walk, he spotted movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged, pausing at the edge of the vines. Two smaller chimps lingered behind him. Martin raised his camera, crouching for a clear shot. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting. Martin kept taking pictures, zooming in, and stepped forward, unaware that the chimp was already descending. In seconds, the chimp dropped onto the asphalt, closing the distance on all fours. Martin lowered his camera just as the animal charged. The impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding away. The chimp seized his left arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, but the chimpanzee's strength was overwhelming. The first bite tore into his forearm, ripping skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting in horror. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled him, striking his head with its fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps reappeared briefly, hooting and circling before retreating again. The male remained focused on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, its horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking him violently. The sounds were horrific. Martin strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel. The assault lasted only a few minutes, but it felt much longer to the witnesses. Finally, another vehicle stopped, and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp released Martin and retreated into the vines, blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and he was lifted onto the flatbed. Without an ambulance nearby, locals tried to stop the bleeding. As the truck sped toward Fortal, he lost consciousness. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he was dead. His camera bag held the memory cards with his last images. The forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.